just imagine a dragon, you know, a sharpshooter.
I am not a dragon.
You know, that's what I think. That's what I just think.
I was that kid where like I would be in school and I would be like, what's the answer? I'm like, that's me.
How do we get a healthy view of money and see it as a resource and a tool?
You know, backing individuals who are not going to only change the world and, you know, create outstanding financial returns, but people that are literally changing the world that we live in today, like category-defining companies.
People have a stereotype that investing or the finance world is for a certain type of person.
For the longest time, I didn't realize that I could bring Jesus into the work that I do. And I think a lot of us don't realize that.
Welcome to the Magnify Conversations. My name's Ruth and I'm the founder and CEO of Magnify.
And my name's Rachel and I'm one of the hosts of this show.
Magnify is a global community and content platform focused on equipping women like you to grow in and impact your sphere of influence. We truly want to see you thrive in all areas of life and want to display what faith can look like at the center of that too.
We started the conversations because we wanted to have real discussions about the things that matter. Money, relationships, and work, all through the lens of faith and our relationship with God.
Ultimately, we know as multifaceted women, things are rarely one size fits all. So we speak with many different women who are from our community and hear their stories. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Magnify Conversations.
Today, we sat down with Yvonne Bajela to talk with her about her passion for investing and how she's been able to pursue professional excellence while upholding her values.
Yvonne is a partner at Local Globe and Latitude, a founding member of Impact X Capital LLP, an investor, a board member of Innovate Finance, and member of the London hub of Global Shapers of the World Economic Forum.
We loved hearing from Yvonne and feel so inspired to give ourselves permission to take up space and lead our own industries with integrity.
So let's get into this conversation.
We're so excited to be having this conversation today with Yvonne. Yeah. Welcome to the Magnify Conversations.
Thank you for having me.
And really, this conversation is important, I think, because it's a topic I'm actually afraid of, which is...
We're going straight in there for the fears.
Yeah, I'm afraid of anything financial, things like that. And we're here to talk about...
Hopefully we demystify the fears.
Yeah. So we're here to talk about how you got into investing and your story as well and your interest. But before we dive straight in, we've got some icebreakers for you. So the first one is, if you had to move your life to one place in a location that you've travelled for work, where would it be and why?
To live.
Yeah.
To live, yeah.
I would go to Ghana.
You go to Ghana?
Yeah.
Really?
It would either be between Ghana and somewhere in the Middle East.
Yeah. Have you travelled there a lot for work?
Not so much for work. I've travelled to Ghana for work, and obviously I'm from Ghana myself.
Okay.
But yeah, I just love it. I've got family there.
Yeah.
Love the culture, the food. For me, food is everything, so...
Food is a big part of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're in good company, because food is everything for me and Sinead
Yeah,
too.
food drives me, actually.
I'm like, when I'm picking holiday destinations, I'm like, do I like the food? If I don't, I'm like, yeah, we're not going there.
So what's like your best Ghanaian dish?
Or I would say waakye.
Really?
Yeah.
What does it consist
You love
of?
food?
Yeah, I love
that just
food.
knocks me out though.
Yeah.
So waakye is like rice and peas almost, and you have it with like stew, egg. You've got to have an egg in there.
Gotta have an egg.
Delicious.
Egg with everything.
You're making me hungry.
I've got another great icebreaker. What's one underrated gift or quirk that you have that people overlook or don't see as a plus?
Me first?
Yeah,
or
you
Yvonne?
first.
I'm going rogue on this because it really, for me, it's an underrated gift. For others, it's just like, what? I have quite a vast knowledge of like condiments, different types of salts, different types of vegetables and fruit. And I'm not like, I love to cook, right?
Yeah.
And I've not been trained or anything, but I would say I know quite a lot of cooking skills and I would know how to do it just because I've watched YouTube so much and watched cooking shows. I think it's a skill.
Do you feel like you can make something from nothing, like from scratch? Not from scratch, but like from anything.
And I'm going to tell you, I feel like all I do on this podcast is talk about salt. But I think one of my underrated gifts, I carry a little tin of Maldon salt in my bag. People think it's funny until they need seasoning on the food. So for me, it's an underrated gift and quirk.
I appreciate
Bit
that.
rogue, but...
Yeah, and Yvonne, for
I
you?
love that. I think for me, I'm always a listener. So people will sometimes look at me and they're like, oh, she's so quiet. I'm like, I'm listening. And then when I have that opportunity to be one-on-one with someone, I will go really deep and, you know, just ask the deepest questions and just uncover who they are.
Do you think you've always been like that?
I have, yeah. I love just going deep on people, who they are, what drives them.
Do you do that kind of when you meet them as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
But get me one-on-one with someone and...
Yeah.
And do you use that in your everyday life, in your work?
I do, because I guess like a lot of what we do is investing in people, and so understanding who they are, what drives and motivates them is really, really important.
Yeah, and even why we're having this conversation today, because I think it's a really important conversation, because I think people have a stereotype that investing or the finance world is for a certain type of person.
Right.
And for you, Yvonne, why do you think it's important that we're having this conversation about investing today?
Yeah, and I think to your point, it's not something that came naturally to me, because I mean, if you look at the industry, you could say that there is like almost like an archetype when it comes to investors, right? And I don't necessarily fit that mold. But for me, like, I knew from very early on that this is my calling, this is what I was meant to do. But it was hard breaking in. It was almost like a baptism of fire, and we can go into that.
Yeah, let's get into that. I mean, you said a calling.
I mean, it's so funny. So a couple of years ago, I read Rick Warren's Purpose-Driven Life, and that for me just was so profound in terms of shifting the way I think, because I came to realize that what you do is so much bigger than you and, you know, who you think you are, what you're meant to be doing. I think in life, we can almost think of purpose as very individualistic, but actually it's so much greater than that. And when I think about what the work that I do today as an investor, it's really, you know, backing individuals who are not going to only change the world and, you know, create outstanding financial returns, but people that are literally changing the world that we live in today, like category defining companies. And so it is very much that personal one-on-one relationship, particularly at the stage that I invest in, where we're coming so early.
So even as a child, right, what did you enjoy? What did you like did you like maths?
I was that nerd. I was that kid where like I would be in school and I would be like, what's the answer? I'm like, that's me. And it's really funny because it was my dad who instilled that in me, actually. Right. So very early on, I was that kid that would be like playing with the abacus from early. At the age of 8 years old, like he was very big, like growing up in a Ghanaian household, knowledge is power, that's all you know. Like you are on your books. So I remember when other people would be playing out, I would be at home doing maths. I didn't like English, so maths was my thing.
But you enjoyed doing that,
I actually enjoyed it, though. And it's really funny because very early on, you know, my dad basically, he would sit down with me and take me through the Financial Times from the age of like 8. Like, who does that? Just picture an 8-year-old going through the Financial Times, going through the Economist, and just understanding the financial markets and so on. And I used to find it fun. I used to go through it and be like, this is so incredible. So from a very early age, he almost instilled in me this belief that I could change the world from a financial perspective. So I always knew from very early that I wanted to go into finance. And, you know, where I am today, I've taken many leaps and you know, pivots, but, you know, it's been a consistent path to getting me where I am.
I have to ask this about your father. So did he do that because that was his interest, or does he have a financial background? Did he just feel that's going to be your path in life? I'm super interested to do you know what his driver was behind that?
I think he was very good with numbers himself. Okay. And so I think for him, it was almost like pushing his passion on me, but I just so happened to really enjoy it myself.
You took to it.
And so I think it was actually a way that we bonded. It's a blessing. He passed away 5 years ago. But he's had the most profound impact because he has led me to make so many of my decisions in life, from studying economics at university, studying it at sixth form, when not many people knew about economics. I was saying, I want to be an economist to my peers, and they were like, what's that?
I think it's interesting, even like you talked about having a vision or seeing yourself going somewhere, having a passion for it, but then not seeing people like you or seeing how many hurdles and challenges come with that career choice, right? Because the investment world is a very competitive world. And I think I'm wondering, what was your driver when you hit your first hurdle where you said, okay, I want to go into investment.
Yeah.
What was the first hurdle, perhaps, and what was your thinking, even though you knew you had a passion for it, but that can turn a lot of people away, right?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that growing up, I grew up in a household which was very much faith-driven. Like, you can do all things through Christ, is what we were always told. So I had this belief in me that I could do anything that I wanted to set out to do. And even when, like, I would hit bumps and hurdles, I'd be like, I can do that. I can do that. Even though, like, this brick's been thrown at me, pick yourself up and get on with it. And so I remember when I started university, actually, so I studied economics, and everyone does the summer weeks and the internships. It was so competitive. I remember applying for every single internship, and I kid you not, the one that I got was because they did this test. You had to do like an online numerical test and a vocab test. I always did really badly in the maths test, but there was the one bank that had their own test, which was slightly different, is the one that I got the job from. And I was just like, even from a young age, I was just like, this is where I'm meant to be. And thank you, God, because I knew I was so determined of what I wanted to achieve. And even though I had all these rejections, like I kid you not, I must have had like 10 rejections, and there weren't that many, internships available at that time. I just knew that I would make a way.
Yeah. And you're saying obviously faith's been a big part of your life, and you're a follower of Jesus yourself. How is that received in the sphere that you're in now? Or maybe even maybe just not now. When you graduated, went into like what you were doing at the time, perhaps tell us a bit about that, where you went from graduation into your career. How's that been received? Do you feel like you can be transparent? Do you feel you can be yourself?
Yeah. I think early on in my career, I didn't, and I used to hold back a lot. But then you get to this point and realization that actually I don't give a damn. So for me, it was very much, I mean, like most of us are going to work in secular organizations, organizations that don't scream about Christianity and so on. But for me, I decided at one point that I'm going to make sure that wherever I am, whatever role I'm doing, I'm going to shine my light, because you don't know who around you you're going to potentially influence, right? And so it was just making that very intentional decision that regardless of where I am, people are going to know that I am a woman of faith.
Did you find that hard though? Because I think all of us, especially if you're raised in a Christian household, so it's almost like you're in a bubble.
Yeah.
And the reality is when you step out of that, but people are gonna pop it and be, well,
and
why do you? They'll say you're intelligent. Why do you believe in something you can't see?
Yeah.
And it's constantly challenged, especially at university. I find that it's constantly challenged. And I think you said you were determined. Do you think that's something people have to do? You have to be determined to stick to your faith, or how did your faith even probably actually assist you in your determination? How did you bring those things together?
I think it's a really good question. And I think for me, I just came to a realization that I cannot do this role without my faith. Right. And so being very intentional about the fact that I am Christian, but why should I hide it? I mean, I go to church every Sunday. So in conversations where people are like, how did you spend your weekend? What did you do? I went to church. So people can know this is who I am. And I think that's really important, because we are called to shine our light and, be the salt to the earth. And so I always try to be really intentional about doing that. And I don't think we should hide it, as hard as it may be sometimes.
What are some of those intentional practices that you have found then? So you said about, obviously, over a weekend, people say, what did you get up to? And obviously you're working with clients and colleagues who'll get to know you anyway.
Actually, because people are always really intrigued. They're like, oh, you go to church. How long have you been going to church? And then you just start a conversation.
It opens up.
Exactly.
Do you have anything that, like, you kind of, for me, you described a bit of a shift point between, it wasn't always like that, and then I kind of got to a point where this is who I am, and I actually want to shine my light, to use your words. Have there been any intentional practices that you put in place that are helpful? So, like, I don't know, like prayer before you going into work, or I don't know, like conversations with your colleagues and people that you serve in, your clients?
Yeah, I think that I always just try to be really intentional. So regardless of who I'm speaking to, I'll very much like, if there's an opportunity to bring up my faith, I'll do that. And so even if like there's an entrepreneur that I'm working with, they're going through a challenge, I'll be like, oh, thank God for that. And just bring God in the conversation. And so they will know who I am. And hopefully through that, they can have an idea of like, okay, she is a woman of God. She is a believer. What I don't want is for people to not know that I am a woman of faith. I think it's so important that, because I think in the word, it talks so much about just shining your light, right? And also the fact that we should show up in the workplace and basically bring who we are to wherever we are. And so for me, that's really important that I'm able to do that. And sometimes it does feel a bit uncomfortable, but I've just got to a place where I'm just like, it's uncomfortable. But in this world full of darkness.
I think it's so interesting that you say that, because I think you have to disrupt sometimes the order of things if you want to be yourself anywhere and talk about your faith. But I started to notice I was more confident in disrupting things when I was good at them. So when you're doing well at your job, or, you know, you show up looking decent, you feel more confident to be who you are. But when the job is not necessarily going well, or everyone knows, oh, this person is always late, or this person is a bit sloppy, you don't want to shine your light all the time. And I think, how do we as believers still get that balance, that you might not be number one in the bank now, but you still have something to contribute? You know, when you first started in the beginning of your career, knowing that I can still contribute and there's a path for me here, how did you like grow that just belief, or even when you weren't the best? Because I think a lot of people think it happens overnight, right? That, oh, you know, it's gonna, and I want it to happen overnight as well, but it doesn't. Things take a long time. So how do you encourage yourself when you knew you weren't the best yet, or you weren't there yet?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I think for me, particularly when I was early on in my career, you know, working in investment banking and so on, it's an environment where I definitely felt like I couldn't always bring my full self. And I think what gave me confidence was just speaking to counsel, like other people who could share their wisdom and how they navigated it, and understanding, okay, yes, you are different, but this is where you have superpowers, tap into that. And I think all of us have certain areas of gifts, or areas that, you know, we're really good at, our strengths. Being aware of what your strengths are, but also being aware of your weaknesses are really important. And I think we over-index so much on the weaknesses, but actually where you have strengths, lean into that. And that's where you will have the power to be the best version of yourself.
And speaking of strengths in investing, right, I think when you put female investment, the words don't always naturally come together in a lot of people's minds. And I know for you, Rachel, whether it's a topic that you think women shy away from, or women
in terms of just finance and investment.
Yeah, finance
generally,
and investment,
I think so.
You know, and I think, what is it that we can, especially even Christians, the idea of prosperity, right? It's somewhat attacked. Not for me though, because I've got bills to pay. Okay, I love me some money. Okay, but still, there's still this block that we can't have that, or we shouldn't have too much, you know. But then I think about the fact that almost every project or mission needs finances, right? It needs the mammon, the unrighteous mammon. We need the finances. So how do you convince other believers that this is an area that we need to grow in and we need to walk in more and not shy away from?
So this is something that I constantly think about, because I think that there's so much power in it as well. And I think that money can make a lot of people feel uncomfortable, but actually it shouldn't.
Why do you think it makes people uncomfortable?
I think societally, definitely where we are now in the UK, it's a very, it's not an open topic. Right. There's, I think, lack of education. I think just, I don't know, fear. I don't really know why. I don't know if it's because I think unless you are financially educated, so you've been raised, Yvonne, in a house where that's been the norm, right? Your dad has set the tone. I think it's not the norm for most people. They kind of get into life and think, how does this work? Again, unless you've been educated. So I'm not sure why, but I definitely know it's uncomfortable. I think in Christian circles, you've got these diametrically opposed things. You've kind of got poverty on one end, prosperity on the other, you know. And it's like, how do we get a healthy view of money and see it as a resource and a tool? It's still a complicated thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think from my perspective, it's almost around the fear that a lot of people have around it. And sometimes it's the fear of taking the risk, right? And I think that as a people, we need to get more comfortable with taking risks. So the entrepreneurs I work with, for example, stepping out to start any business is taking a risk. And you almost need to take risk in faith. And I feel like when you think about Christian circles and so on, we should be encouraging each other to step out and take more risks, because at the end of the day, we are kingdom builders and we are called to build, whether it be within real estate, whether it be within the world of business, whatever it may be in the world of investing. We should have the ability to take risk and be comfortable in that and say that, you know, I'm going to stand with you regardless of what happens. Because if you look at the world that I operate in Silicon Valley, for example, where a lot of these companies are born, risk is celebrated.
Interesting.
Here in the UK in particular, like being a Christian, risk is almost discouraged.
Yeah.
And we need to get to a place where risk is more comfortable, because risk is where the reward comes. Risk is where we really make change happen. So until we get comfortable with taking risks, I almost feel like that's really hard to change. And we just need to embrace risk more. I think particularly like in the culture that I grew up in, you're advised to just, you know, work at a company, work your way up, become a director. That's what success looks like. But actually, let's step out and take more risk and change the world.
Have you had to learn to become, like, enjoy risk? Do you know some personalities are just naturally risk averse, right? Others, they're just a bit more on that edge. They're happy to take a risk. I guess, first of all, I want to know, where do you naturally think you sit on that? And then as you've gone through your career, obviously it's developed from investment banking and you're part of a firm now as well. Does the risk become any easier?
Or if anything, I'm taking more risk.
Yes.
But when I think about risk, it's really interesting, because from my perspective, I'm in the business of risk. I invest in startups. 60% of startups in the UK will fail. And so it's inevitable that if I invest in the company, I will have some failures. And actually what I found is that you learn from your failures. And that's why I say we need to celebrate failures. We need to celebrate taking risks.
But when you hear statistics like that, so 60%, right, will
you
fail.
You said that with a smile on your
you
face.
said a smile on your face. But I'm thinking, do you go to work? Like, do you have sort of a logical angel and a risk angel? Do you know, because if that's the statistic and someone's presenting their idea to you and you're thinking, okay, it's so exciting, what skills do you use to determine I'm going to go for this? What part of your personality or, you know, training or skills do you utilize?
It's actually really interesting. There's a few actual biblical principles that I think about whenever I'm determining whether I'm going to invest in a company. One of them is around the motivation, the why. So whenever I'm looking at a company, an individual that wants to start a company, I'm asking myself, what is their motivation? Is it just money? Right. Is there like something, an underlying mission that's driving them? Because at the end of the day, if it's just money, there's so many other ways to make money. When the going gets tough, they'll probably be like, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. I think the second thing is like wise counsel. I don't know everything. So if I'm assessing the business, then it's really important that I am leveraging the expertise of others within that domain. And also time. You know, time compounds, experience compounds. As you make more decisions, you just get more confident. You develop those better heuristics in terms of this is what good looks like, this is what great looks like. And also conviction. So conviction is very important in the work that I do. If I don't have full conviction in investing in something, then I just won't do it. But it takes time to get comfortable and confident to step out and make those decisions. But with time, that obviously comes. And I also feel that, yes, in every decision I do make, there is an element of risk, but it's taken me getting comfortable with that.
Do you think?
And actually, I've learned the most from my losses.
Okay.
Do you think that you have to be quite shrewd as an investor, or you just have to, you follow that process that you discussed? Or is there like, do you know what I'm saying? Do you have to be quite a cutthroat person to be in this business? Because that's what I imagine. I just imagine a dragon, you know, sharpshooter.
I am not a dragon.
You know, that's what I think. That's what I just think. And I think, I've got so many good ideas, but they'll ask me about the figures and then I'll fold, you know. So what personalities kind of take to it, or what inner traits? You said it's not a dragon trait that we see. What inner traits or inner qualities do you use if you see an idea that maybe is not fully developed, but you have a conviction and you just think, I know what it needs, this business needs.
Right, yeah. And I think it's a combination of two things. So we're very much invested in the people behind the business, because at the end of the day, like I said, building a business is incredibly tough. And oftentimes that one-to-one interaction with people, you can uncover a lot. What's their motivation? Why are they doing this? What are their ambitions? What are they trying to achieve here? And then the other side of that is, does the market make sense? And sometimes you can't tell. I mean, we invest in businesses whereby they may have no product at all. So it's really us investing in people's vision. And so they have to take us along the journey, be great at selling that journey, and then it's up to us whether we want to take that risk. Yes, there's a lot of no's, and it's probably the hardest part of the role, saying no to people, because people are presenting you with their dreams, their visions, and for you to say no, you don't want to crush anyone's vision, right? But it's part of the business.
Have you ever said no and then seen something blow up?
Oh, yeah.
And what does that do for like your inner
It's a real bummer. I'm like, oh man.
But has it taught you anything about like your gut instinct, or do you just kind of accept that you don't know? You know, you said about seeking wisdom, that you obviously don't know everything. And just because we analyze something, we think, I'm not sure that's going to cut it. You know, it's not for me. Do you ever reflect on those conversations
all
and
the
think,
time? All the time.
Can you give us maybe not a direct example, but a bit of an example of when that's happened?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started out investing, I was like, oh, this business looks so cool. I'm going to invest in this and this. And then you realize very quickly, that's not what you should be focusing on. Like, something can look great, can look shiny, but not all that glitters is gold, right? And so I came to realize very early on that it's really about the people behind the business. So really deferring to that. But when I have looked back on some of the investments that, you know, maybe I should have made, I didn't make, I always do. I'm very reflective as an individual. So I look back and say, okay, why did I, miss out on that opportunity? What was it that at the time I didn't see? And that just helps me in terms of developing my conviction next time, whereby if I see something similar, I'll say, okay, I missed out on that opportunity. What can I take from that? So I think just being very open and knowing that we all have biases as well. So I can say, I don't like this particular industry. I don't think it's one that will work. And then suddenly there's a company that blows up and does so well in the industry. You just always have to be open, and you always have to almost educate yourself. The markets move so quickly.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. My name's Rachel.
And my name's Sinead, and we'll be your hosts for these episodes as we're joined by incredible women from the Magnify community to chat through their lived journeys and experiences across money, relationships, and work, all from the perspective of their relationship with God.
We know so many of you already watch these conversations, so if you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, hit the button now. It really helps this important content to reach even more women around the world and ensures we keep bringing these conversations to you.
We hope you enjoy this episode. Let's get into it. I think in terms of even being open as a believer, has someone ever presented an idea to you that you've thought, this is great, but I don't want to invest in porn? Like,
oh my gosh, it happened last week.
Because that is a money-making business, but already, oh really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, on the money there.
I'll give you the tea.
But it's just, there might be some ideas that you think this would be really successful, but my faith, it's just not agreeing with me.
100%.
How do you sort of say, well, I could use the money for the kingdom eventually? I can go back around. So how do you say no when there's an opportunity in front of you, but your faith, in Christ just says, this is not something I can support?
Yeah, and I think that's where you have to be really principled and know what you don't want to do and set boundaries. So last week, a friend of mine actually introduced me to a company that was basically helping people share nudes with privacy. Like, there's a privacy app, share nudes. And I could see how it could make a lot of sense. And I was like, okay, this actually could potentially become a big thing. But I was just like, nope, that's not an area that I want to go into. And even if you look at companies like OnlyFans, that company makes like nearly 500 million a year. Great company. But am I going to do it? No. And so sometimes I do just have to tell myself, this is great, but not great for me. Someone else can come and do that.
How do you kind of reconcile things that are potentially... There are a lot, even though you've never invested into, for example, that idea that you just said, it's almost like a loss because of what you could have had. Have you had that where being principled and being valued and just your relationship and walk with Jesus has meant you've had to say no to something that financially is incredibly viable, but from your values is a no? Have you ever sat on the fence? So for you, that was like a straight up no.
Yeah.
But have there ever been things that you thought, actually, it's a bit more of a grey area?
Yeah, I think that's definitely happened, but more so when deciding on the individual.
Okay.
Where values don't align. So that's something that I'm very big on. And I guess if you think about it, like when we're investing in companies, it's a 10-year journey.
Yes.
And, you know, some people say that the average investor relationship lasts longer than the average marriage, unfortunately.
That might be true. That's the sad thing.
Because
So
it's a 10-year
haul.
journey. And so I'm always saying, is this a person that I want to partner with over the next 10 years? And if it's not, then I'll rule that out. And so if values don't align, and sometimes you can get really difficult people, and oftentimes the really difficult people built the great companies. But I just have to be very principled again and just say, actually, values don't align. So I'm going to have to say no. And it's hard.
That's so interesting, though, that it's really a focus on what you're both saying is there's a focus on people there. Yeah. It's not, you know, can you add? You know, it's can I partner with this person?
Yeah.
And I think it sounds like you have to use a great deal of like discernment and knowing the psychology of someone or being a people person, as you said earlier, that you like to go deep with people. Yeah. So it's like you're using your passion for people really in your business every day. And I think a lot of people wouldn't think that when it comes to the investment world. I think they'd think it was what's on paper that qualifies somebody, but actually what you're hinting at is it's the person, it's the individual.
Always, yeah.
Right? Yeah, so it's just really interesting. Maybe there's hope for me yet. You know, but I think you mentioned earlier about empathy for people as well.
Yeah.
That's fascinating to me, that comes into your decision-making. Can you tell us more about that? Yeah.
I think that, you know, when anyone's setting out to build a business, they're in a place of vulnerability. They don't know they have these great, like, vision in their mind of what they want to try and build out, but they don't know if it's going to work. And so I think being empathetic to the fact that it's not going to be an easy journey for them, and you just want to be that support system for them along the way. I always say it's almost like a privilege for an entrepreneur to say they want me to invest in their company because they're enabling me to be part of that journey and them potentially changing the world, right? And so when it comes to empathy, it's just that ability to know that this is not going to be an easy journey, and they may need a shoulder to cry on. They may need someone just to sense check things with, and just understanding that, being understanding of whatever they may go through, you are going to be that listening ear. And I think for me, when it comes to people in particular, I feel as if my faith has enabled me to, I guess, manage relationships in a different way. So I guess two things. I very much focus on the individual, and no one's perfect, right? And recognizing that, let's not expect people to be perfect because none of us are perfect. And so I always try and look at individuals and say, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Let's lean into your strengths. Where you have weaknesses, how can we find other team members to plug those gaps? And, you know, we are all created as masterpieces. So what is it that makes them the masterpiece that they are? And just like really tapping into that. And then on the other side of that, I think it's just giving people the space and just partnering with them, like truly, truly partnering with them in the sense where, yes, it's not always going to be rosy. Sometimes I'm going to have to provide you with constructive challenge, but it's coming from a place of love. I try to always lead with my heart when it comes to, you know, those investor founder relationships.
The alignment of values and character, the person, is obviously massive for you, Yvonne. What are some of can you pinpoint any of the characteristics that you're looking for? So put the business idea, the number to one side. When you think about the individual, potentially journeying with them for 10 years, I don't know why I've never thought about it as a long-term thing, but it makes sense. What are some of those characteristics that you look for and you think, yeah, that aligns with who I am, I can serve you, I can help you, we can make this work?
Yeah, I think it's somewhat like individuals who are really mission-driven. And so their purpose is bigger than themselves. I mean, obviously having drive and motivation for money is great, but at the end of the day, like, the entrepreneurs that do best are those that are going to be really mission-driven. They're building for a greater purpose because they've seen the way things are done in one space, they want to do it better, and they want to impact the nations. So that's one thing that's really, really key. And just intellectual honesty, the ability to be very open as well. Integrity is really, really important to me. I think that in this space of business, a lot of people can try and cut corners. And I think that you can try and cut corners, but at the end of the day, it's going to take you back to the same place. Do things the right way.
I think what you just said is so profound about mission-driven. And I think the term entrepreneur is just all over the place right now. Like anybody that is selling like a cupcake to everyone's I'm an entrepreneur, you know, and everyone is. But the fact that you said the real successful ones are ones that are trying to solve a problem that is way bigger than themselves, and it has nothing to do with finance. And I think, is that a key sort of factor when you're looking at someone to invest in? It's that drive and that mission.
100%.
Yeah, no,
100%.
It's just so different to how you think people filter success.
Yeah.
You know, it's not that. It's more about a greater purpose. So obviously you've talked about risk and how that is a big part of your work. And also even success. So when a business is doing well, you know, it's something that a decision that you've made, but how do you not let your business and the things you're investing in and the success of that affect your identity and how you see yourself? Because so many of us, our work really reflects on how we value ourselves or our purpose, if our purpose is going well or not. So how do you separate those two things and stay confident in who you are?
It's something that I actually initially struggled with because, I mean, starting out as an investor, I made some terrible decisions, but you learn from your losses. And I think that just recognizing that actually my purpose is not attached to the companies I invest in, but it's more attached to the process. Because I think when we think about purpose, oftentimes it's like a place, a destination, but actually it's about the journey. It's about our everyday interactions. It's about our daily habits. And so what I've come to realize is, I'm in the business of people, and even if a business goes really well or if it doesn't, at the end of the day, how have I helped along that journey? What has been my role? And just focusing on the people that are building, right? Just trying to bring out the best in these people, whether it be, you know, in any way that I can support. And so for me, it's just really around, you know, am I enabling these individuals, supporting in the best way that I can, irrespective of whether the company is doing well or not doing well, and how am I adding to people's journey? And I think that's something that's almost been reflected throughout my whole life. I was always that friend was like, you should do that. Why are you not doing this? Like, you can do so much better. Jump on the plane, go to LA, get that dream girl, go and do it. Like, I was always that friend. And I think that's reflected in the work that I do today. I'm always trying to bring out the best in people, regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, it's almost like that vision awakener, like backing somebody, not just financially, but backing them with encouragement. And I guess, you know, that some people, I feel I'm a bit like this too, is like that irritating person who you told something.
I'm like, why have you not done it?
3 months ago. Yeah, I'm also the person who's like, oh, so how's that going? And you think, oh, why are they going to ask me about that? But I guess a lot of that then also comes just from not just your background, your upbringing, but your relationship with God.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested because we talked a lot about the people that you're investing into, the entrepreneurs, their motivations. How does your relationship with Jesus inform your motivation for what you do? Because investments, it's financially lucrative for a lot of people, that is the sole reason they get into it. For you, clearly, that's a benefit, but it's not the driver. So how does kind of your relationship with Jesus inform your motivation for what you do day to day?
Yeah, and it's really funny because for the longest time, I didn't realize that I could bring Jesus into the work that I do. And I think a lot of us don't realize that. And when I came to that realization, it's really about, my daily interactions. How do I enable people and bring out the best in people to fulfill their purpose? Because at the end of the day, even though I'm working with people who may not necessarily be Christians, it doesn't mean I can't still help them bring out the best in themselves, because that's what we're called to do. We're called to, we're not like, when it comes to our own purpose, it's not so that we can bask in our own glory. It's so that we can, shine light on others and raise people up to be the best version of themselves. And so that's something that I definitely focus on when it comes to how I think I can operate in my purpose.
That's good.
Do you feel, in terms of the journey you've been on, you've been able to embrace who you are and what you're called to? Because I think what Rachel's speaking about, our why, and that's something you're very clear on. And it's not always easy in a world where there's so many distractions, like, let me go and pick up this skill now, or let me become a blogger, or they're having more. How have you been able to embrace your calling and stay in sort of your path despite maybe other people thinking, oh, you're still doing that? Or do you still find that fun? How do you stay centered on your passions? How have you developed that fire for them?
I think we're in a world where there's so many distractions these days, and you can think, oh, I need to be doing that. I need to do what she's doing. But actually, just being very true to being your authentic self is so important. And I think for the longest times, even though I've worked in finance and investment for a while, I've done various roles, and I had to almost get comfortable with taking the risk to try out different things, because I'd work somewhere and be like, this is not for me. What do I do next? And one thing that I'm a big believer on, and I always shake some of my friends, because I'm like, if I don't want to be somewhere, I'm going to get up and leave. If I feel like somewhere has served its time, that's it.
I'm so interested in that, because how do you know whether you're just having a bad day,
season, or if it's a timely?
This is time to move.
How do you discern that? You've literally took the words out of my mouth.
Because I think also people over-spiritualize things like, oh, I don't sense.
I need a word.
Yeah, and I love saying God trusts you enough to make these decisions. He gave you a brain. He gave you eyes, ears, but we still, again, there's that fear that we have, that adverse to risk. Ironically, even though we're supposed to be using faith, right?
Yeah.
But how have you been able to just build that confidence to say, the time's up, or actually this area is not for me, I need to find something else? What do you say to yourself, or what steps do you take to be able to make those moves?
I think you just have to ask yourself, is this place where I am now serving a purpose?
Interesting.
And if not, then what do I need to do? Where do I need to go? And it's really funny, because sometimes I think, like you said, we can over-spiritualize things. And a couple of weeks back, my pastor gave this sermon where he was like, sometimes we want God, like God orders our steps, but sometimes you have to step out and take the step first in order for it to be ordered. And sometimes we can be like, oh, I'm praying for a word before I make the jump. But actually, in that waiting season, you can be doing other things, like speak to other people, get that counsel from people. We are meant to live in a community. Don't hold decision-making to yourself. Speak to people, get people's perspectives on things, but then have that discernment, because obviously people will have all sorts of different perspectives. Yes. It's down to you then to have the discernment and be like, okay, this person has said this person has said this, but actually this is what's right for me. And I think that people underestimate just how powerful, you have the ability to choose your own path, but you have to have the confidence to do it. And sometimes it takes stepping out and making decisions. And I think throughout my whole life, one area that I have so much conviction and confidence in is the fact that, yes, I can take risks. Yes, I went from investment banking to strategy consulting before becoming a VC, right? And they were completely different things, but what's the worst that can happen? I took out a step of faith, and okay, strategy consulting, I realized, okay, I actually want to go into VC. But in taking that step of faith, if I didn't try out different things, I wouldn't be where I am today. And so what's the worst that could happen?
I think I really resonate with that, because I think sometimes people always look for, even create barriers why they shouldn't go somewhere. So people will say, oh, this race doesn't do that, so I need somebody like, oh, this culture doesn't do that. And I've always been really big on, look, I need to please God. Like, that is the only person I need to please at the end of it. But the reality is sometimes you step into that office or that building and then you're, oh, nobody looks like me, or nobody talks, you crack a joke, nobody laughs, you know,
so
because
what?
there's not people like you there. And especially, I know that for a fact in finance, you know, I know the stats, there's very few women in that space.
Right.
You were convinced, you were pushed, you were ready to make the moves, but how did you continue to take up space in this male-dominated environment and say, no, this is for me too, it's not based on what I see, it's something that I know internally. Yeah.
And I think one thing about myself is it's always underpinned by faith. So I can go into a room, feel like the only one, but I'm there for a reason. I'm not in this room by coincidence. And so although I may feel uncomfortable, although I may look different from everyone else, but what is the purpose that I'm here to serve? And I think that we have to recognize that and focus on that, because I can go to many rooms and be the only one, but I'm not going to let that deter me. Because at the end of the day, I've got something to achieve there too. And why shouldn't I be there? And so just having that confidence that, you know, I have every right to be there.
So many of our community are in seats that they probably feel like they're the only woman, perhaps person of colour. Like, there's all these different things where you just feel like I'm the only one. And I think sometimes there can be a pressure or a felt sense of responsibility to be the trailblazer, the poster child in this industry or in this room. What would you say to someone in our community who's in a seat where they maybe feel like the only one, to build their courage? Are there any practical things that you've, like, even, I don't know, some people will even talk about their inner, you know, their self-talk or the way they dress,
that is
or
me.
Preparation. Like, what do you do? Even if you're super confident, but even if you go into a room and just think, okay, right, I'm represented today, you know.
And I mean, that confidence is not always forthcoming, but it is that inner voice to yourself. Like, I am meant to be in this room. I'm the head and not the tail. Sometimes you have to talk to yourself and make yourself confident, because it doesn't always come naturally, right? And being able to shake up the table, because yes, you are different. Yes, you see the world different. You come from a different background, but actually that could be your superpower, because you're seeing things from a different perspective. You're able to bring a different perspective that maybe others in the room may not see. I mean, think about the world that I'm in. I'm a Black woman. And so naturally, I'm going to gravitate more to women founders, to Black founders. And so where they may be overlooked, I'm bringing them to the table.
Yeah, there's an opportunity there.
It's my superpower.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so actually we should see our differences as really powerful, because we bring something unique to the table.
Does that ever feel like an overburdening to you or not?
It used to. It used to feel like an overburdening, but then I came to realize that actually our differences is what makes us unique, and it enables us to see things differently. So we should walk in that power.
Yeah. I think it's so, you say things so eloquently as well, the way the things you've been through, but you say it with such grace. And I think about those really hard moments where it's not been easy, all the pressures that have been on you, even as a wife, as a mother, how you've had to sort of probably at times take a moment to really reflect on what's important, or the job or the children or the marriage. You know, how have you been able to balance these things and still keep your purpose alive, so to speak? Because I can imagine, like, becoming a mum, for example, you start to think, should I be doing more of this and less of the investing? It's time for me to wrap this up now. You know, what were some of the conversations you were having with yourself in those times?
First of all, I'm going to tell you there's no such thing as balance.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I was waiting for you to say it, but I agree. Yeah.
I mean, I thought there was, but there's not. And that just means that I have to be very intentional with my time. and ensure that, sometimes work will require more of me, and that's okay. Sometimes home life, my children, my husband will require more of me. But it's just about ensuring that whatever I'm doing it with intentionality. And also, it requires a village. I would not be able to do this without my support system because...
I think, knowing the times as well. You're saying there are certain times where family requires more, and that's the thing that has to take priority. Nobody likes to say this, but there are certain times where your work, your career, and it's not just about, I think that gets so muddied because it's kind of like, oh, you're putting your job before everything else. No, like this is, if you said for you, it's a sense of mission and purpose. And that sometimes just has to take precedent that day. And I think it's knowing the time and knowing the ebb and flow rather than the balance, because when is anything ever in balance in our lives ever?
How do you know that ebb and flow though? How do you pick up on it? Because you're both mothers, right? So how do you know now is the time to push? Now is the time to sort of actually focus on this now?
I think sometimes you have to be told.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
So there's certain times it's obvious, for me anyway, where I can see this is a season where work or whatever it is got to take more of me, and that's okay. Speak my family and my children through that. I don't just leave them on the sideline. It's like you say, it really takes a village. It's not a one-person thing at all. We've got good support, and I think you need that if you're going to live this sort of a life. But I don't think I always know. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes I need somebody to say, hey, actually I think this really probably requires your attention. I'm not just talking about any stranger, but my spouse or someone who's a really trusted friend might just say, give that a bit of attention, and then I would pray about it. Or sometimes I'm just like, you've just said what I already know that I was trying to deny.
Definitely.
For me. So I don't know, how about you?
Yeah, and I think being really intentional. So, for example, something me and my husband started doing is before we had children, we would have date night all the time. Since having children, that declined. And we've just had to start doing day dates.
Yes.
And just being really intentional about how we use the time. Because I'm like, I don't know if I can go out in the evening. Like, the kids are sleeping by like 7:30. So let's go out in the day. And just making it work for you as well. I think that you can put yourself in this position where you're comparing your situation to others. But I think you need to find what works for you. And it's hard. It is hard. There is times where I'm like, I wish I could be at home more. I wish I could do the nursery run today, but I've got to be in the office early. And so it does take this, it's almost like a tension between the two, like a home life, work life. I want to do both. And sometimes you just have to make sacrifices on either end.
I think any time we experience success or we're doing well, it's feeling grateful to ourselves as well as God and everybody else. We feel in the right sense proud of our achievements. Do you have any tips or wisdom or thoughts for women like us and our community who, when we're in a season where things are going really well, how to remain humble and grounded? Do you have any like bits of wisdom or anything that helps you?
I think being humble and being confident are not mutually exclusive. So you can be both at the same time. And I think that you really have to examine yourself. So for example, if you're putting out a social media post and you're like, I've just achieved this, like think about, is this adding to people or is this just you basking in your own glory? So being really intentional about that. And then the other thing is just thinking about the context as well. So in trying to be humble, also make sure that you are still operating in your purpose. For the longest time, I shied away from sharing the work that I did because I was like, I don't want to boast. I don't want to seem like I'm being too like flashy in terms of the work that I do. And then someone told me that actually in doing that, you're hiding your gift. And so then I realized that actually having that context that yes, you can be humble, but also you can still share the greatness of what you're doing. But at the end of the day, you have to assess and examine whether what you're sharing and so on is adding to people or is it taking away from people.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
In a fast-paced industry that you do work in, and you've got all these other commitments, how do you keep yourself sort of on track with the fresh perspectives? People are creating floating hoverboards today, then they're doing this. But how do you say, I'm still keeping myself on track, but actually also taking time to just find joy in your day-to-day life. Like, not everything you have to jump on or be a part of. How do you discern between the two?
I think that I'm just really intentional in terms of how I spend my time. Like, in the industry I'm in, things move so quickly. Like you said, hoverboards, like AI
floating
now.
People.
The World Economic Forum is telling us that 85 million jobs are going to be lost. And I need to stay on top of that. So yes, you do have to be intentional. Yes, you do have to make time to stay on top of what's happening. It does require you to just always build up your intellect in terms of what's happening now, where our industry is going. But then I do also need time to decompress. And if that means like stick on some trash TV, that's what I'm going to do.
So staying sharp for you in terms of your work, would you still kind of describe yourself as an economist then? Because you have to stay on the cutting edge of the market and what's happening. Would you still define yourself really because you're a learner in that continually? Because you can't it's not the kind of thing that you learn once and you know it and it's done. It's an ever-evolving space. So how do you, I'm just interested, do you still kind of define yourself as a bit of an economist like that?
No, I would say that I would almost describe myself as a lifelong learner. Constantly have to be learning. Otherwise, you just get left behind. And so whether it means listening to a podcast, whether it means, reading. So I actually carve out time in my weekly diary to just, have a read of blogs, have a listen to a podcast. When I'm on my commute to the office, I'll be listening to a podcast. And that's my way of staying on top of things. Also, as an industry, it's one that's really network driven. And so having conversations with other people, what are you currently looking at? What's currently of interest? What should I be spending my time looking at as well? That is super, super valuable. Yeah. And so a lot of what I do is just spending time with other investors as well.
Yeah, and speaking of communities, here at Magnify, we are a community. And I think this community is going to love this conversation, but we want to know how we can support you, where we can find you. Do you have any projects you're working on at the moment that we can support you in?
I actually just started a podcast where I'm sharing the stories of entrepreneurs, their journeys, what's driven them. So we spoke a lot about mission and, why are people, deciding to take that journey of building a company. So tune in and subscribe to that, I guess.
Where can we find you? What's the name of the podcast?
Yvonne Bajela. The Startup Leap is the name of the podcast.
Thank you so much, Yvonne, for being on the Magnify Conversations. This was wonderful. Thank you.
I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's conversation. We hope you gleaned as much from it as we did.
You can join us to cultivate wisdom, be inspired, and gain knowledge on how to put your best foot forward in your career, money, and relationships, all grounded in faith as we grow together.
If you haven't already, subscribe to our channel to keep up to date with all of our episodes at the Magnify Conversations.
If you have a story to share and would like to be featured on the conversations, get in touch with Team Magnify through magnifycollective.com and head to our contact form.
We'll see you soon for another installment. From all of our team and crew, have a great week.